Welcome back to another episode of Point and Click Puzzle Games with myself, Angela McCall, whereby over the last few tutorials and weeks we have been on a journey to build a Tic Tac Toe mobile app game using the Lua programming language and the Solar 2D game engine, and all of this stuff is free open source code for you to use. So if you haven't been here before, please go check out previous tutorials that I have on my channel, and do remember that my channel is designed for helping teenagers and adults who have never programmed before and upwards. Okay, so in our last tutorial, we were looking at events that were taking place so that people could tap on the screen and the app would know which square was being tapped, so that in due course we will place the player's counter on the grid. The problem was that there was a chicken and egg scenario whereby in the logic of our scene management we needed to create the code because we've got the board being designed obviously before it displays, but the events will be taking place after things are on screen, so everything is in the wrong place with our code. So there is a way to fix that, and to fix it we need to use an array, which is what we're going to be covering in today's tutorial. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to dive on over to my left-hand monitor screen, and just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to my channel, stay notified for when I release videos, which is generally 3 times a week, and if you can leave me any comments and questions below, I will get on and answer and reply to those as best I can, because I do dive in 2 or 3 times a week and do so. So here we have the code where we left it exactly in this place in the last tutorial. And just to quickly recap, if you've come into this video fresh and you don't know what the problem was, we've got this sequence or a chain of events where the app is loading the content on the page. Everything is linear, so it's working from the top all the way down. So as we come down and it's loading in the fact that this function exists and so on, we get to this point where we're going to have to draw the grid. Okay, now all of this is taking place at the moment inside the show wheel. So if you look back at some previous tutorials when I've talked about the scene template and the composer management of our app, you will know that there are different stages of things that take place in our app sort of life cycle, as it were, and this show wheel is like the preparation of what goes on behind a theatre stage, behind the curtain, before the actor literally runs out onto stage. They are already dressed up, we've got to dress them up, we've got to put their makeup on, they've got to be stood behind the curtain ready to jump onto the stage when they are needed. So this is what is going on, essentially. That show will, or they will show on stage, as it were, in the English language, that's how you would say it, but essentially we are in this section here, this scene event show, and we are populating everything that's going to load the moment our player opens our app, which is why we have this dilemma, because when we start listening to events taking place, the events will take place after, once the board has shown on the screen, or it did show. Okay, so now it's on screen, but we need the code to be down here, but yet it has to go before the event is added, so that it knows that there is code listening for this which square tap. So we have a chicken and egg scenario, and the way we're going to get around that is by literally in a moment moving this event listener and this function down into the correct location, and we're going to put, as we design our squares, we're going to put them into an array, and the array will then be used and accessed down here, getting around that chicken and egg problem, and we're going to bring the objects back out of the array and start adding the event listeners to them. So first of all, we've got to get our squares as they are created into the array. So what I'm going to do is, because we're not ready to use it yet, I'm just going to literally for the moment comment out that code, because we do need it, but it's just not going to be used just at the moment. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to create this array. So let's come over to our API reference library. Let's put in a word array. There we go. just bring up, there we go, a table of arrays. So now think of a table, like literally imagine something like an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, you've got lots of columns of data, lots of rows of information, but we have to design that table existence in memory. Okay, so we use something called an array, which means instead of at the moment where we've been creating variables and we've been adding one piece of information at a time to that variable, this array variable is going to have to hold lots of data, or in this case 9 objects, which is the 9 squares of our grid. Okay, so one thing just to quickly bear in mind, in an array and a table, same sort of name. When people talk about matrices, it means that instead of putting a bit of information into, or lots of bits of information into the array itself is holding other arrays, and so you start to get a matrix, literally a matrix effect. Now that's quite a complex sort of concept to grasp at this stage. We don't need it, but I just want to make sure that you're aware of the terminology. Should you see or read about arrays and you see it mentioned, you kind of got this understanding that it's an array put inside an array, and every single cell has an array in it, and it can be quite confusing initially at this early stage, which is why we're not using them in this app, but you need to be aware of them. Okay, so in Lua, the library called table is a collection of functions used to manipulate tables or numerically indexed arrays. And I wanted to read that to you here because pretty much as far as Lua programming language is concerned, we're now going to be talking about tables, but essentially is an array. So if you have got programming experience from other programming languages, then you are familiar with the term arrays. And obviously for this particular lesson, we're talking tables. Okay, so I've just updated the little name there just to make it a bit more reflective of what we're doing. So let's look at the tables. Okay, so what we've got here is we have to insert things into the table, as it were. So what we've got here is now the function, it's like a function call, as it were, using the table library, using the insert function. And what we're going to do is we are going to insert and a value. Now this particular syntax here, if we just name the table and give it a value, it's going to find the next available slot. So a table is infinite. Okay, think of a class. You know, you're going to have lots of students in the class. Okay, so this could be a table called class, and each value could be a child's name. Okay, so every time you add a child to the class, it's just going to add it to the end of the list. Okay, however, sometimes you might want to access or insert children in the middle. Say, for example, if you want to put all the children in this table in alphabetical order, and then you get a new or a latecomer turn up and their name is Mavis right in the middle of the alphabet, you might need to position that person in the table as well, which is why you've got this third option down here. So you can name the table, you name the position in the table that you want to go and put that value, and then you've got the value itself. And what will happen is you'll be able to push all the other bits that come after it later on in the table as well. So that is one of the ways to sort of handle data. But essentially at the moment, right now, we are literally just going to add each table as it comes in, and because we know the value of the square, because we've already given it a number in the previous video, we're actually going to be doubly safe and make sure that every square is being positioned in its own correct location within the array as well. So I'm going to start by copying this particular syntax right now, and I'm going to come over here. And so instead of, before we get to the point where we've changed and updated the number, we've given the object its number using this, which is getting populated and updated. Again, see the previous tutorial. Okay, we know the counter name, so we're going to put the counter number because that's going to be its specific position. So literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we're going to give the number, and we're going to literally take its number there, and we're going to put that number. So now, as we create our squares on the screen, every time this function is being called, not only are we drawing a square on the screen, we're giving it a number so it knows how to identify itself, and we're then putting it in a table in its position with the same name, and we're putting the value. So that's its position number and its value. So that could be essentially like the person's, so it could be, I don't know, A for Angela, B for Ben, C for Charlie, etc. if you was putting that class name, that metaphor that we was just using. Okay, so now we're going to create our table and our array. Okay, so before I hit save now, we've got one more problem, is that we're trying to put all of this data into a variable here called array board, but we haven't actually created the variable, and we have to do something slightly different when we are working with arrays. So I'm going to come up to the top outside of all our scene events, and we're going to create, I'm just thinking where to put it, let's put it here, local, oh, there we go, local array board. Right, okay, so now we've created a variable, but we need to do something very specific with this variable, because we need to say, at the moment it's just a variable. The game or the app doesn't understand that it's actually going to be used as an array, so it needs to work with it in its own way a little bit differently. So what we're going to do is we're going to put equal signs and curly brackets. Now those curly brackets are our way of saying that the data that comes between those curly brackets will be stored in an array. Okay, now if you actually look, we have used these already. If you look down here, we have got a variable that has actually stored an array of data and parameters all about the message hello world on screen here. Now we have actually used this concept. The only difference between this array and the one that we're creating is because this is part of the text object, some of the coding aspects to handle this array have already been dealt with us already for within the programming Lua language, whereby we have to do a little bit more maintenance and work in order to access our variables and our content of our array ourselves. But essentially you're not that far off having used some of this stuff beforehand. And I'm just going to tidy up my code a little bit. I like to put my opening brackets on the same line. Right, save. Okay, so now our array exists, but how do we know it exists? Because when we come down here at the moment, where's our array gone? There we go. Down here, we've not got any errors, but we've got no way of seeing in our game console what's happening. So let's skip on down to where the code needs to be. So let's just, we've got our characters that we've got set to invisible for the moment, but let's just come down here, because what we need to do now is we need to access our array. We need to get that content back out so that we can add now the event listeners that we need and all the other bits and pieces. So this code that we've got up here is now going to, where's it gone? This code up here for the event listener, we're going to copy and paste in a minute down in the correct section, and we're going to move this entire, in fact I can do that now. Let's move that entire function down here. Okay. All right, let's uncomment it for a minute. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we've now got our function in the correct place, but we still need to get our objects out of the array and assign to them this event handler. So let's just take that as well. Okay, and bring that back down here because we're going to need it in a minute. Okay, so how do we access our array? Well, we're going to do this. It's kind of like it's in pairs we can access the data. Now we could just say pairs on its own, or if we're basically there's two ways to access the table data. Now we happen to give the position a number, which makes it an index, which makes it a numerical piece of item or positioning. So we can use the I pairs command, whereby if we had given that that positioning a name as opposed to a number, we could just use the word pairs. So again, it's a very fine detail, but it's something that you can sort of help fine-tune your coding abilities when you get going. So what we're going to do is in pair. So we're going to use a for loop with a twist. So we're going to look for the value, the index of the item, which was the position that we gave it, and the value. Okay, let me just put those as actual words so that you can follow suit. So index, so for index and value in I pairs, because we're using numbers. Okay, we are going, oh, I've put in pairs twice, bear with me 1 second there, that's right, I pairs. We are going to do something, okay, and then don't forget we always end our code. So that's my opening statement line and that's my end where this for loop is going to finish. But we now need to say which array we're going to search. So we're literally going to start typing array and it's going to name it. So obviously if we had 4 or 5 different arrays existing within our code, we could name each one and obviously it would know. So for whilst there is, so basically get for the index and value, because you can't have something living in a place without it having a position, and you can't have a position without some value. So in pairs, literally, we're going to get the index and the value of every item in sequence from the array, which is a table, like a list of information. And whilst there is content to get, we are going to do whatever it is that we paste between this for end loop statements. So as always, I'm going to start off by saying that we've actually accessed this for array in pairs loop, okay, so that we know we're in it. All right, so this will print out lots of times every time that this loop iterates through, okay. And what we're going to do is we can also put in here print, and we're going to print off basically the word index. So if I put index right now, okay, colon, and again that little concatenation print statement that I did, and put the word index, okay. And then I can also put a concatenation side, open quotes, and then we're going to put value as, in fact, actually we don't need to put the word value, we know what it is, index, colon, and then value. Okay, so let me explain what's going to happen now. Okay, where's my cursor? Okay, so we're going to print a piece of text into our console over here called the word index. Okay, in fact, what we can do is, what might be easier actually, is if I open the square bracket like that. I'm just trying to make it the easiest way I can to show you what's going on. Okay, so we've put the index inside square brackets, and then we've got the value, and it's going to print out this information. And I've just added a little bit of text string code there to help display this, and so we can read it nicely over here in the console. So I'm going to hit save. All right. There we go. So what we've got going on here, so this line here we know is being repeated lots of times, so we could probably get rid of that now, because we know that the actual index and value is being printed. So in position 1 we've got the value 1, in position 2 we've got the value 2, in position 3 we've got the value 3, etc, etc, all the way down to 9. So we now know that the square brackets are the index, so we know that this is like cell number 1, cell number 2, cell number 3, etc, 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 all the way down to 9, and that is holding an object that's name is called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so this is all good. So we know that we can access our array. So now what we need to do is every time we get that object, which is technically the value, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to assign this to a local variable inside this only. So we're going to call it object square, just so that we can understand what we're doing, and we're going to assign it the value just so that it's easier for us to work with this terminology. And we are going to give that the event, what we've got going on here, as the event listener. Okay, oh, 2 colons, there we go. So we've now got this object square that we've retrieved out of the array. We're giving it an event listener, which we have already established in the previous episode was called a tap event, and now it's going to call that function, which is already loaded into memory because it's positioned before this for loop takes place, and that is going to print the target number on screen as well. The problem we have is that we've added a value and not the object itself. So let's just come back up here to where we created the array. All right, there we go here. So what we've done is I've actually put in here, if you look carefully at this section here, I've put the object, but I'm actually putting the value of its property number in here. So the actual number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is being sent over, and not actually an object that has all of this other stuff going on with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take out that. So we know that our structure is working, but we're passing the wrong information. So I'm just going to delete the word number, because this object knows it has a number value, okay? And so when we come down here, let me just tidy up my code. We've got to retrieve now a value dot number if we want to print it to screen. Let me just save that. In fact, actually, let's not, because yeah, let's save that. All right, and what's going to happen, it's going to go through all the way through. Now, nothing looks like it's different in our code, but what I'm actually doing is I'm passing an object, which is being retrieved as a value, but we don't know what that value is, except that obviously it's coming from the array board, so we know that that object has a property called number, and that's how we're able to print it on screen. So now what that means, just to make things a little bit easier for us to understand so that we don't get lost in our own code, is I'm going to create a local object called square. Okay, so we've retrieved our, and we're actually going to assign it value. All right, and the reason we're going to do that, let's take this code out because we don't need that. Okay, now, as a way of talking to ourselves through the code that we are creating, we know that we're actually dealing with an object called square. Okay, so I'm just going to hit save. Again, nothing looks like it's changed when it loads. There we go. And so now we've got this, the index in the square brackets, there we go, and then we've got the value showing because we're still showing the value number. And to prove that this still works, I could take that entire line and I can print it underneath now, but instead of just printing the value of the index, instead of hitting value there now, I'm still showing the object square number instead. And there we go. So we know that our object is working properly, and that number of its property number is carrying through with it as we pass it in and out of the array, and that's how we're accessing it. So if you look back up here where we're in this show will, when we've created the array board, okay, so we've put all of this information now one cell at a time through our array, but because our array actually was initialized up here, where have we gone? I've lost it. There we go, on line 30. Because we've initialized it outside any of the scene events, it now means what we've done is inside the show wheel, we've created the object. We then added it to the array board, which means it's instantly available to all scenes. So it's now kind of, think of it as like almost living up here now. And then we go down to show did. We're now using that and bringing it back into this section of code where we are grabbing it out of the array, assigning it to a local variable, and then we can access the properties once more. I mean, we could have called that grid square, but that might have just added a little bit of confusion because we've got grid square going on up here, but essentially it is the same object. We've just called it a slightly different name down here so you can follow the logic. So that means we can get rid of all of this extra code here now, and now we have the solution to our events taking place in the did section once everything's on screen, but being populated with our objects being created beforehand. And that's how we get around that chicken and an egg scenario using an array. Okay, so now we know the array logic itself is working. The next thing we need to do is we actually need to, before we can identify which square is tapped, we've got to give it that event listener again. So we've got our object. I almost forgot to do that. So we're going to add an event listener. Okay, and we are going to call it tap. There we go, and we're going to put our comma, and then it's this name here. Okay, so again, just like we taught in the last tutorial, again, if you haven't done it, I'll put the description, also the URL in the description below. But essentially what we've got going on is as the code runs down the screen reading into memory, the game is going to load in the fact that this function which square tapped is existing. Okay, but it's not going to do anything with it until it's told. Okay, then it's going to go instantly into this for loop, grabbing every object or every square out of our array and creating an object out of it. Once the object itself has been created, we can give it an event listener, which calls this square tap. And now, if we've got everything right, look, there's a little dot, so I just need to save my code. Right, leave everything to run, so it's all finished. Now, with a little luck, she says, fingers crossed, I can click on square 1, and I'm going to click on square 5 and square 9. Let's go 3, 7, 4, 2, 6 and 8. So every one works. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So now we can do things, all sorts of weird wonderful things, because our next step is to basically say, identify which player has just had their turn so that we can put their character on the screen. But the problem is we haven't got a way of determining at the moment which player is taking place, player number 1 or player number 2. So we have lots of things to create now in our next tutorial, which is essentially going to be dealing with our players, and possibly, if we get through it in the next tutorial, a randomizer so that the game itself can decide which player goes first. And that's all happening in the next tutorial. So if you haven't been here before, please put your comments below. I am interested. I will dive in, answer any questions you may have. Please do subscribe, stay notified, put your comments below, and I'll see you on another episode real soon.